what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to the Culture Code, a 5-episode pulse check series where leadership, multicultural marketing, and technology collide. I'm your host, Christian Ponce, and for the past 25 years, I've dedicated my career to marketing communications and public relations with a focus on inclusive and multicultural marketing. As I often say, marketing is my passion, but multicultural marketing is my calling. We'll explore how higher education institutions can better connect with diverse and multicultural audiences, leverage technology, and implement best-in-class outreach marketing practices to advance your brand's mission. Each episode explores different aspects of the marketing mainstream. Experts, leaders, and practitioners share valuable insights and practical advice on creating culturally relevant campaigns to help your institution stand out from the sea of sameness. So buckle up as we soar to new heights and reach incredible marketing destinations. This is Culture Code. Sean bienvenidos. Let's get into the episode. Welcome to the Culture Code. Today we have with us Dr. Luz Williams. She's a seasoned, fully bilingual education professional with a background in communications, public relations, and educational leadership. So today we're going to discuss key areas necessary for universities to be successful when designing campus events for diverse prospective students and their families. Many universities still aim their marketing to all prospective students in the same way, using generic messages that assume prospective students are a monolith, which we all know they aren't. So cultural intelligence, nuances, and language are not only important but required. Today, we will discuss some strategies and initiatives that colleges and universities should consider regardless of their location, size, and budget. We will also talk about marketing personas, particularly in the Hispanic market. So let's get into the episode. Dr. Williams, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me, Christian.
Super happy to be having this conversation with you. And we know we have conversation of Mike that in the Hispanic community, there's a 13% gap in college attaining. You are a highly educated individual. You have a PhD. So tell me a little bit about what inspired you to keep pursuing your education. And do you think there's some cultural barriers or things that I think Hispanics in this particular case have to confront in order to be successful academically?
Growing up, I felt like my biggest obstacle was that I had to kind of live a double life. I had my American life and I had my Dominican life at home. And so culturally, I was living under a household that presented cultural rules, right? I was a female. I was not allowed to make decisions about where I wanted to go, if I wanted to hang out with my friends. Those types of things were always dictated by my parents. And so as I moved up in the education system, I realized that I had to kind of live a double life. If I wanted to be successful in the school system, there were things I couldn't tell my parents. There were, things like, they don't understand this, so I'll just sign it myself. And, nowadays you're thinking, oh, well, she was, forging her parents' signature. But it really was more of, I saw the opportunities that I could take and I took them. And so I kind of had this parallel where I, was the educator of even my parents of what the education system looked like here in the United States. And so as long as I was bringing home straight A's and as long as I was not getting into trouble, they were okay with that. And so the one thing that my mom always told me was, don't let someone rob you of your education. And I said, what do you mean rob me of my education? And she was like, education is the only thing I can give you that no one can take away.
Okay. That is very.
And so that stuck in my head, especially when times got hard.
No, that's very deep. And I think as you start thinking about cultural barriers and cultural nuances when it comes to Latino families and in higher education, I know that family ties are extremely important to Latinos. And I remember watching a movie about 20 years ago, The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants with America Ferrera. And it talks about how families really have a hard time seeing one of their kids going away and leaving the household, or even maybe a business. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why is that so ingrained?
So, funny story. And a lot of people don't know this about me, but my cultural barriers really were about gender and different roles that we had in the family, where males are supposed to do a certain thing, work and provide and things. And women were very much domesticated. And so when I decided that I wanted to go to college, my mother was like, "Oh, no, you can't do that." And so it became very stressful at home because I was valedictorian of my class. I was always top of my class because that was what she enforced growing up. And so I had a really close relationship with my father. And I said, "Dad, what was the point of you all making me get these grades if I can't go pursue my education?" And so my father said, "Don't worry, I'm gonna help you." And so my dad actually snuck me out of the house in
Wow.
order for me to go away to college. And unbeknownst to me, he had been making these plans with one of our neighbors. And he had stashed a suitcase away and a trunk back in those days in the
Mhm.
90s. And he had been putting like paper in there and notebooks. And, he didn't know what I needed for college. And so I went to college with basically nothing. And, some of the things that my dad had put in there. And we literally snuck out of my house at 3 a.m. in the morning, took the Amtrak, and I went to college 5 hours away from New York City in a very small town called Oswego, New York, in upstate New York, right on Lake Ontario. And that's where I remained for the rest of the 4 years. And I got a lot of backlash from my family because women are not supposed to leave their homes unless they're married. It's considered kind of like an insult to the family, or something negative. And so that propelled me to want to succeed. I was not going to disappoint my father, who had gone against my mother's wishes. And so that's how I pushed myself to continue to persist and stay in college.
So I have a question for you, right? Because I think our parents, at least my parents, were baby boomers. So
Mm.
I am a Gen X, and now we have different generations coming after us. Do you think those Hispanic mentalities are changing with generations, or do you think those are very much ingrained in the culture?
I think that things are changing. I don't think gender roles are as stringent as they used to be. But we still have the familismo part of it, right? Where we feel obligated to our families and whatever they teach, whatever the cultural nuances are. And so we feel like we have to uphold those values and ideals that our families instilled in us, but also do the things that we need to do in order to continue in our education and be successful. And sometimes those clash. And so when we know what the value system is in these specific cultures, um, as colleges and universities, we have to invest in finding out the research behind Latinos, but also, the family dynamics. Because nowadays, even with with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, the family input is very important. And so, regardless of what culture they come from, I think that messaging to families is becoming more important in the forefront of marketing and advertising to multicultural groups.
That's a great point and a great segue for a quote I want to read, because I think it matters. I think it's that important to consider culture when you're doing multicultural marketing. This quote that I want to read right now is from the great Tom Burrell. For those of you who don't know, Tom Burrell was the founder of Burrell Communications, one of the leading African American marketing and advertising agencies. He was incredibly successful in the 70s, and he is the one who coined the term, and I quote, "A black man is not a white man in dark skin." A black man is not a white man in dark skin, emphasizing that culture and authentic representation were important in advertising. With this simple yet profound concept, he secured the advertising business of Toyota, Coca-Cola, and McDonald's, among other iconic brands. So that really struck me that he said that, a black man is not a white man in dark skin. And the way I see that is that cultural nuances are incredibly important when doing multicultural marketing. So one of my first multicultural marketing projects was translating a brochure from English into Spanish. Can you discuss the significance of authentic representation, cultural understanding when engaging with diverse audiences?
I think that here in America, we really focus on the nuclear family. And the nuclear family in itself is very common, right? But in our cultural nuances, there is an opportunity sometimes where you have extended family members who either live by you or live in your household, like grandma or auntie or, um, you know, cousins. And so the prospect of knowing another language becomes very important because you have to communicate with your family members. And so when we are making decisions about going away to college, it is a family decision. It is not just my decision as the student. And so communication to the other members of the family is important in that when you are translating or you're trying to send a message, that the message may not come across if you are just using AI or Google Translate, because the languages are very different. And as a Spanish teacher for 20 plus years, I used to preface my classes like that. I used to say, I want you to think backwards because our languages are structured in a way that the things that we say in English um, don't translate directly in Spanish. And so, you know, idiomatic expressions are things that don't really translate. There are things that you can say in Spanish that don't necessarily translate to English very well. And so just having the understanding that if you do use something that's going to help you translate a document, that you also have to run it by a person who maybe can read it and say, oh, this didn't translate over correctly. What you're trying to say here in English is not translating over because it can be offensive, or there can be words that are used that may confuse someone or give them the wrong impression or the wrong message. And so it's important to vet that translation.
That's a great point. And I understand that in your daily responsibilities, you include planning and preparing campus visits for multicultural families. Can you talk a little bit about that? And what are some of the best practices that you have introduced at ODU that other colleges and universities may replicate? What are some of the things that colleges should look for?
I always say use the resources that you have on campus. Sometimes I think that sometimes institutions may think, oh, I have to pay a translator, or I have to go outside and find someone who's going to do my marketing for multicultural marketing. And that can very well be the case if you're doing that large scale. When you're starting off, use the resources you have. You have your students. So for us, we made it a priority to hire students who also spoke another language. And so they had the opportunity to assist us with bilingual tours. And the students also felt a little bit intimidated because they're like, oh, well, my Spanish isn't all that great. And I said, not to worry, because your message is simple. We have to think about messaging in a sense of the show Who's Smarter Than a Fifth Grader, kind of at a fifth grade level. You're not speaking at a collegiate level, which is why translation from English to Spanish, from a brochure that already exists in English is a little dangerous, because the language may not translate over because we're using collegiate language when we're marketing to American families who speak English. And so we have to take that down a notch and then translate over so that everyone who speaks Spanish, again, Spanish is not monolithic. We have people who say certain words in Mexico that mean something totally different in the Dominican Republic and vice versa.
What
And
about the
so,
cultural aspect? Because I know that we have talked about how you design the events that are more family centered. Because
absolutely.
can you talk a little bit about how they bring their kids and some of the things that you need to plan for just to make sure that you have a good experience for the family and that it's like an engaging opportunity for the university?
I can give you one specific example. When we have our bilingual events, we know that it's a family affair. And so we prepare for families to bring their, not only the student that's coming to college, but they may bring grandma with them, but they also, so you have to make sure you have accessibility opportunities. So a golf cart, they may need someone to cart grandma around in a wheelchair. So you may want to make sure that you have those things in play. But you also have to think of the siblings, the younger siblings. And so what we did was we prepared areas for their students to sit with their parents, but then family members can sit off to the side and do an activity. And so for the younger siblings, we had coloring books and we had crayons. We printed off pictures of our mascot because we're also marketing to them as well. Their experience matters because when the decision is being made and the family is bringing their input, their siblings may say, I want to go there too, or I had a lot of fun. And so it just adds to the experience.
I love that. I love that. So I like to talk a little bit about. So we talked about everything that has to do with culture nuances, best practices. What are the differences between just translating, but really adapting and creating in the language in this case Spanish. But tell me a little bit about technology. Recently, actually earlier today, I was talking to a colleague of New York about the great things that ChatGPT is doing, for instance, for content creators, not just for writing content, but also for marketers and doing competitive analysis and all of that. Do you know some of the tools that admissions is using in terms of tech and AI?
We typically use our CRM system, but I know that there are some AI tools that are being used for folks to ask questions. We have a translation tool on our website so that if you're from any country, you can click at the bottom and it translates it back into your language. And so facilitating that communication piece is really important, but also the visuals are really important. And so when you are marketing and you are marketing to a Latino family, they're going to use their visual communication first. And so if they see a picture that they don't really identify with, they may not be as interested in receiving the message. And so making sure that if you are advertising to multicultural families, that you're also including multicultural images that they can relate to as well.
That's great. Thank you. That's super important. Um, I always like to wrap up these podcasts with real data, right? And the profound implications that doing cross cultural outreach and good multicultural marketing really has. 4 year institutions, the 6 year graduation rate for Latino students is 13 percentage points lower than of white students. According to the think tank Excelencia en Educación, however, what I find remarkable is that according to a 2023 report by NBC News, Excelencia in Education estimates that to close the gap, Latinos will need to earn at least 6.2 million degrees by 2030. Think about that, 6.2 million degrees by 2030. So here's the thing. Soon, this will no longer be just a Latino problem. It will be an American problem. Why? Because by 2060, 1 out of 3 Americans is projected to be Hispanics. Are there opportunities for colleges to improve their outreach, recruitment, retention in Latino students and families? What is your take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, the Latino GDP right now, it's I want to say $4.1 trillion. And so we have to think about um, not only are we not accessing that market, we're not accessing those dollars. And so if we want to see our enrollment numbers come up, we have to see what has contributed to the gap and fill the gap.
Well,
So if that's financial aid, if that is a language barrier, if that is cultural nuances or creating an environment that's going to attract a Latino student or multicultural student, then those are the things that we need to be preparing for. Because there, like you said, by 2060, 1 out of 3 people going to college will be Latino. And so what are we doing to prepare for those students? For students, the cultural nuances, if our culture is family-based or familiar, right? What we call the familial experience, then we need to create experiences and we need to create groups and organizations that are going to create that family-like atmosphere for students to be able to be retained. What can I join that's going to help me feel at home? That sense of belonging piece is going to need to be there.
Dr. Williams, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on the episode. Thanks for everything that you do on a daily basis. And thank you for working together on the common good for society. This has been The Culture Code. Thank you so much for tuning in.
This Pulse Check mini-series has been brought to you by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.